Do you have the other piece of the mask? The yellow?
Let me see.
No, I don't think that's it. I've not found anything in so long. I'm tired of this. I'm going to take a break.
Yeah, I think so.
Completing the first draft of your research paper is a little like taking a break from a nearly completed jigsaw puzzle. You have the big picture to guide you, the outline. You have all the pieces you need, and a pretty good idea of what the completed picture will look like. But before you go on to fill in the remaining pieces to make the picture complete, you may want to evaluate your work so far. Have you used your quotes correctly? Do your examples support your main points? Have you used the correct form for your citations? One way of evaluating your work at this point is to participate in a feedback session with a few of your classmates. This process of reading and critiquing each other's papers at this early stage can be very helpful. Let's drop in on the class now and see how they do it.
Okay, today we're gathered to take a look at a couple of essays, first drafts of essays, and we're going to take a look at them to see what we can do to make them better. It seems in the writing process that once you have a first draft done, you're home free. And that probably is the greatest amount of work, but it's not finished. Never is finished. We want to take some time between a draft, let it sit for a while, let our thoughts regather, maybe let some thoughts back into the well of our minds, and then come back to the essay and take a look at it. Almost invariably, what we did may be good in the first draft, but we can make it better. And usually what we do to make it better is to employ one of 4 little rules that I teach. Okay, and I want you to try to remember them. They all begin with ease, and that sometimes makes it easier. First thing we want to do is we want to make sure that our prose is as exact as possible. And when I say exact or exactness, what I mean is that you want to make sure that your wording is precise, that it's accurate, so the reader knows what you're trying to say. Okay, you can't just fish out words from the sky, words that you like and that sound good. You have to make sure that the words mean what you want them to mean. Okay. The second rule is explicitness. Okay, just for another E word, explicitness. And what we mean here is that we want clear, specific terms, concrete wording, even in the evidence examples, so that the reader gets our point. Okay, sees what we mean. So when we say explicit is clear. The reader should see what we mean. And then a third rule that we want to follow is economy of expression. Okay? Economy of expression very basically means that we want to use the fewest words possible to get our meaning across to the reader. It's all very well and good to be flowery and to be erudite and so on, and to use what's called polysyllable words. Those are words of 3 or more syllables. But if we can use a 1-syllable word that almost anybody is going to know, as opposed to 3 or 4-syllable words that only people with PhDs would know, given who our audience is, we probably should go with the more familiar, the simpler words, so that if you think that in a college essay you ought to use the word vehicle as opposed to car, I think car is the more preferable choice. More people use car, and a vehicle can be anything, but a car is specifically one thing as a rule. Okay? And then the final rule that we want to employ, and this is the rule that you really come back to late, is you want your prose to be as elegant as possible. Okay? You want to dress it up nicely for the reader. And usually you can do some simple things to bring elegance to your writer. For instance, if you use some sentence variety in your prose, that is, use some compound sentence and some simple sentences as well as complex sentences, the prose will be what's called coherent. The sentences will work together, but also they will be more fluent. They will flow much more naturally. They will sound better. And in addition to elegance, or another principle of elegance would be that you want to use the active voice whenever possible, as opposed to the passive voice. Those are our 2 main voices in English writing. The passive voice is a sentence like this: the ball was dropped by the catcher. That uses a few more words and is not real clear, it's vague, than to say the catcher dropped the ball. So whenever possible in writing, you ought to prefer the active voice over the passive voice. And then finally, as a way of trying to get some art into the writing, if you tend to be a person who speaks humorously, that you have a natural gift for a little bit of irony, a little bit of satire, it's a good thing in writing to use that kind of tone. People enjoy a variation of style, variation of tone. you don't always have to be serious. But if you find that you're not really a person who engages in humor or satire or irony or anything like that, and you don't really understand it, then you ought not do it, because it probably will not work to best effect. But again, if you do have a gift, a flair for creating paradoxes and so on, that will spark the reader's interest in what you're saying, maybe be able to create some metaphors, some colorful language that will brighten what you say without taking away from your meaning, then you ought to do it. Okay, it's a good thing to do. Sometimes these come through in our first drafts, but often if they're not there and they come to us as we're considering what we've said and how to say it better, then we go ahead and stick them in. I'm just going to give you one little story about a very famous poet named W.H. Auden, who was asked late in his life when he knew a poem was done. And he looked at the person who was asking the question, and he said, "My dear fellow, one never finishes a poem, one simply abandons it." And I think kind of that's what we do in writing, that we keep working on it and keep working on it, but finally we have to let it go so we can go do something else. Okay, so you ought to see a draft as clay that you produce that now you can make even better, more attractive, so you get the finished pot, if you will. Okay, so now we have these two essays to look at and try to engage the four principles that I've talked about so that we can make these drafts even better than they are. And believe me, they're pretty good even in this condition. Okay, so Frank, I think you were going to read the first essay for us called the Steroid Seduction. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at each paragraph after Frank has read it, and then when Mary reads her essay, and we're going to see what we can do very quickly to make them, to enhance them, to make them a little bit better than they are. Frank, would you go ahead, please?
Every competing athlete entertains thoughts of becoming the best. For some, it is a daydream. For others, it is a goal to be attained, despite the cost. Has today's athlete been subtly seduced by the lure of greatness? Some argue that today's athlete is facing the proverbial serpent and the forbidden fruit scenario. Should they take steroids or should they stay clean? Is their natural ability enough? These are common thoughts of many great competitors. Of course, the ideal would be that all athletes would compete clean. Unfortunately, various reasons lead athletes to use strength-building drugs such as anabolic steroids to enhance their performance.
Okay, thank you, Frank. That's a pretty good lead paragraph, but if we look at it, we can do some things to some of the words in that paragraph right away to make it just a little bit better, okay? If we look back into the second sentence of that first paragraph, for example, coming to the end, it says, it is the goal to be obtained despite the cost, okay? Now, my question would be, the cost of what, okay? What do we mean when we say despite the cost? Despite the cost of pain, despite the cost of injury, reputation, what do we mean? It's not really very clear in that second sentence. So if I were going to revise that sentence, I would find a different word or a different little phrase for that end two-word phrase, despite the cost. I might just change it to at all costs. Okay, and that might make it read just a little bit better, a little clearer, much more to the meaning that we were trying to convey. If we go down a couple sentences to the question that says, should they take steroids or should they stay clean, I have the same kind of problem with the ending word clean. Okay, what do we mean clean here? Should they take more baths, or what? I'm not quite sure that's what the writer meant for us by that word. I think a better phrase would be to stay free of drugs, or to say stay drug-free. Okay, and then our meaning is explicit. It's exact. Okay, there's no confusion about the possibility of the word clean. And then if we look at the next question, these are common thoughts of a great many competitors. Now that just has to do with logic. Look at the word thoughts, okay? Thoughts is referring there to the previous two sentences, okay? And of course those sentences, yes, they are thoughts, but they're specific kinds of thoughts. They're questions, okay? And so if we're going to have exactness of meaning in our wording, then what we need to do is change that word thoughts to, anybody know? Questions. Questions is the more exact term there, and it brings exact meaning to that statement. And then finally, almost every introductory paragraph ends with the thesis statement, that which controls the development, gives the main point and controls the development for the rest of the essay. And if you look at that last sentence, unfortunately, various reasons lead athletes to use strength-building drugs such as anabolic steroids to enhance their performance. That sentence is a little unfocused. Okay, we know now that we're talking about athletes, and we also know from the rest of the introduction that we're talking about their use of anabolic steroids. All right, and by implication, in the wording of this thesis statement, we know that this essay is going to look at the reasons athletes use anabolic steroids. Okay, but it's a little hazy. It's a little ambiguously stated in that thesis statement. If we'd simply change the wording around, we don't really need to use new words here. If we just change that wording around, we'd have a better focused thesis statement. So that if we had, unfortunately, today's athletes often use anabolic steroids to enhance their performance for a variety of reasons, now the reader gets that focus that's essential. We're talking about the athletes, we're talking about the use of anabolic steroids, and we know that the writer is going to tell us the reasons, going to explain the major reasons that athletes use these steroids. Now, one thing that we could do even better with the thesis statement, we know we're talking about reasons. If the writer would name for us, just list out the words, the key words that will follow in the topic sentences of the supporting paragraphs, then we would know what's going to come next, what's going to be discussed. When a writer uses such words that indicate the main points he's going to develop, we have a guide for the reader, okay? Some textbook writers call that a map statement or a map element, okay? You can think of a guide or a map element as a kind of embedded topic outline. And it really does help the reader follow then. It sets up the reader's expectations for what's going to follow, and that's a good thing. So Frank, let's see if the writer does that for us in the next paragraph.
Recurring injuries plague numerous athletes. Often these injuries may be or seem to be insurmountable. Studies reveal that anabolic steroids accelerate the healing process of muscle tissue. Steroids ensure the athlete speedy recovery. It presents a nearly irresistible offer. Ben Johnson is an unfortunate example of an athlete who opted to use steroids for the healing purposes. Although the drug served to rectify the ailment of the pulled hamstring, he later was denied a gold medal in the 1987 World Championship due to the use of an illegal substance.
Okay, thank you, Frank. In that paragraph, we have a good clear topic sentence. If we look right away to the second sentence and even the third sentence, we see a couple of little problems that are the same type that can be corrected pretty quickly. In the second sentence, for example, the writer says may be or seem to be insurmountable. There is a thing in logic called redundancy. Now, redundancy means very basically that one uses two words that mean the same thing. And in this instance, may be and seem to be both basically mean the same thing. So the writer ought to choose one or the other, whichever is preferable. May be insurmountable or seem to be insurmountable, whichever is the more exact expression for that sentence. And then we see in the next sentence, studies reveal that anabolic steroids accelerate the healing process of muscle tissue. And then the next sentence, steroids ensure the athlete's speedy recovery. Those two sentences are very nearly saying the same thing in sentence form. So there's a kind of redundancy as well. And if I were going to revise this essay and try to eliminate some unnecessary words for economy, then I would eliminate the second sentence that says steroids ensure the athlete's speedy recovery, or somehow perhaps weld the meaning of those two sentences into one. Then if we look at the next sentence, it presents, or the end of the next sentence, it presents a nearly irresistible offer. All right. I think we have a word problem there in the word offer. All right. Steroids themselves can't offer anything, but steroids do make available an opportunity. And so I would substitute and put opportunity where offer is, and I think have a little more exact meaning at that point. Okay? And then the last sentence of that paragraph, although the drug served to rectify the ailment of a pulled hamstring, we've lost the focus of Ben Johnson in the beginning of that sentence. He was later denied a gold medal in the 1987 World Championship due to the use of an illegal substance. Well, at the very end, we had the phrase illegal substance. Our essay is not about an illegal substance, it's about anabolic steroids. And so there is a principle of writing called substitute phrases that mean very nearly the same as the key phrase that you're using. But an illegal substance is a very general phrase. It can be heroin or anything like that. So a better phrase than illegal substance needs to be used right there. All right? And I would also revise that sentence away from the idea of the gold medal back to the idea that he used the anabolic steroid to heal himself. because that's what our paragraph is about, and then we would have a good sound example, okay? Frank, why don't we jump right now to the concluding paragraph of that essay and take a look at another area that could be revised, okay?
Steroids consistently bring controversy to the center ring, whether used for healing injuries, gaining energy, or improving athletic performance. In a world where competition determines the greatness of both an individual and a nation, it is unfair to deny the incredible pressure that drives athletes of the world-class standings. In the minds of many great athletes, being second best is not being a good American. Before banishing the athlete who would opt for illegalization of steroids or use steroids despite their illegal status, consider the manipulation that occurs in the daily bombardment of advertisement schemes. You can almost picture the serpent raising its ugly head and hear the coaxing, luring, melodic promise, you can have it all and you can be the best. The American public is part of the seduction every day. You almost can't blame the athlete who sides with Eve, or can you?
Okay, in that concluding paragraph, we find a good beginning summary statement. And had the elements of that summary statement been put back into the thesis statement, it would have been much better mapped. The idea of healing injuries, gaining energy, or improving athletic performance are all the main topics that were developed in the body of the essay. But I want you to look at the phrase controversy to the center ring. And then I want you to drop down and look at the word serpent and who sides with Eve. Okay. Now, basically, what we have here is the writer's attempt to use metaphoric language to make the make the language more interesting, and it does to a degree. But what happens in this paragraph is that the writer mixes the metaphors. Which should it be? Should it be the center of the ring, or should it be the serpent-Eve idea? Well, if you go back to the beginning paragraph, the writer used the idea of the garden right there. So more appropriate for this essay, if you're going to be consistent, is the idea of the seduction through Eve and the snake, and that would have been better. So if we're going to start off with the metaphor at the very beginning, then the controversy to the center of the ring needs to be changed to make it fit with the idea, the controlling metaphor of the serpent and Eve. Okay. There are some other problems with that concluding paragraph. For one thing, it's pretty long. It jumps around a bit. And usually what we do in concluding paragraphs is we try to summarize our main points and then emphasize what we should learn overall from the discussion that preceded the main point. And in here, the writer takes time to give us some general ideas about where athletes fit in society and how we respond to them and that kind of thing. With several sentences, a more economical concluding paragraph probably would have used maybe half the number of sentences and focused on, these are what we talked about and this is what it means, keeping the metaphoric language. And so the reader would have been focused right in on what was happening, what had been happening in the essay, and get that point again. Okay? When you're revising, you want to make sure that you keep the point, the focus, and the thrust of your argument in mind. Don't go far afield and bring in other, perhaps equally valuable and entertaining information because you didn't discuss it previously. Keep your focus, okay? Your job will be much easier at that point. All right, well, that's the first essay. Frank, you did a good job reading. Thank you. Let's take a look at a second essay that we have called The Running Range. And Mary is going to begin reading it for us. We'll pause at the introductory paragraph and take a look at some things that we might do there to make it better. Mary, would you begin for us?
Sure. Fitness is a buzzword of the 90s. People of all shapes and sizes are integrating exercise into their hectic, on-the-go lifestyles. Businessmen and women don their sneakers at lunch hour and head for the gym or the park. Students are occasionally known to desert the library with running shoes in hand. Mothers are seen jogging behind strollers as well. Staying fit has become everyone's job. Of all the exercises to choose from, running is probably the most convenient and beneficial. Running is helpful because it strengthens the heart, increases lung capacity, and relieves tension.
Okay, thank you, Mary. I just have a couple recommendations for that introductory paragraph. If we look at the sentence that begins, students are occasionally known to desert the library, and the next sentence that says, mothers are seen jogging, we can see that we can make those two sentences more focused and more economical, and also have what's called parallel form if we make a couple changes. Remember that previously I talked about using the active voice as opposed to the passive voice. But those two sentences are written in the passive voice. If we change them and put them in the active voice, basically using the same verb, then we'll have sentences that are all, 3 example sentences that are all in the active voice and that flow really well to the thesis statement. So this is what I would recommend. Instead of saying students are occasionally known to desert, I would just say students desert the library or often desert the library. And that way we have active voice, we have the students doing something, just like we had the business men and women don their sneakers, which was a nice way of stating that previous sentence. And then mothers are seen jogging. We can simply say mothers often jog behind their strollers. And again, we have a simple sentence that's in the active voice that follows out of the previous 2 sentences. And then I have a little bit of a problem with the word choice in the next sentence. Staying fit has become everyone's job. Okay. Well, we were talking about before, fitness is the buzzword of the 90s. People of all shapes and sizes are integrating exercises in their hectic lifestyles. So why don't we say, instead of job, which makes it sound like work, and I don't think that's our point here, why don't we substitute a word like passion for job? Okay, because people have their 9-to-5 jobs, and usually with jogging they do something else. All right, and I would like to comment on the thesis just briefly. Unlike the other essay's thesis, which was kind of unfocused and needed some word shifts around so that we saw more exactly what was happening in that essay, this essay has a good, clear thesis statement. Running is helpful because it strengthens the heart, increases lung capacity, and revises tension. We know from that thesis the 3 areas of development that the writer is going to give us in the body of that essay. Okay, and so, Mary, let's read the next paragraph and see that.
Engaging in an endurance exercise such as running guarantees the strengthening of the heart muscle. Much more blood than normal is pumped in and then pumped out. This increased volume stretches the heart and makes it more efficient. By running regularly, the volume of blood is maintained at a higher level, thus supplying the heart with a greater oxygen content.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, again, we just have some word choice matters in this paragraph that if we change the words, then we'll have a better paragraph. For instance, engaging in an endurance exercise such as running. If we look at that, yes, running does require endurance, but really the kind of exercise that it is an aerobic exercise. And so I think that we need to shift aerobic or substitute aerobic for endurance there, and we'll have a more accurate, more exact statement. And then if we drop down to the 3rd sentence of that paragraph, this is increased volume stretches the heart and makes it more efficient. First of all, I think that volume needs to be described, and we'll make it clearer and more exact. And so I think we ought to put in blood volume. All right, now I'm not really a doctor, but still it seems to me that's the kind of volume that we're talking about. And then I would look at the word stretches in that sentence. I'm not quite sure that blood volume stretches the heart, but makes it beat more efficiently, maybe exercises it more. So I think that word needs to be substituted. A word like builds or even strengthens again should be substituted for the word stretches. And besides, the point of our paragraph was not stretches, but strengthens. So it seems to me that builds or strengthens is a more appropriate possibilities there. Okay? And then if you look at the very last sentence, by running regularly, the volume of blood is maintained at a higher level, thus supplying the heart with a greater oxygen content. Okay? I'm wondering about the accuracy of that sentence as well. Is because there is an increased volume of blood the reason that we have more oxygen to the heart? Probably it is, but also the person is breathing more and therefore also adding oxygen to his or her blood. And maybe that sentence ought to be revisited for accuracy. Make sure that it's precisely worded at that point. Okay, let's go ahead to the 3rd body paragraph quickly and then to the conclusion. Mary, would you read the 3rd paragraph for us?
Running not only strengthens the body, but promises a healthy mind and spirit. A good run is a great stress reliever and can take care of a headache as well as any aspirin. Physical exhilaration often results in mental stimulation. During a run, one is able to reflect on the day's events and gain new perspective on any given situation or problem. The runner completes the exercise with renewed energy, ready to face the challenges at hand.
Thank you, Mary. That's a pretty good paragraph. I would make some recommendations again, though. So like in the 1st sentence, I'd ask, whose body are we talking about? The runner's body or the watcher's body? If we want to be absolutely clear, let's describe body here. And then in the 2nd sentence at the very end, we have a nice analogy that running works as well as an aspirin can quite often to help us get rid of headaches. And so I would keep that analogy, but I would add after the word aspirin the word can. That way we have a balanced analogy. And then just drop down to the bottom. The runner completes the exercise with renewed energy. Well, that's rather vague wording again. Yes, we want some word substitutes, but the runner doesn't complete the exercise. Usually runners finish the run. Okay, and so I would substitute completes the run with finishes his run or finishes her run, something like that wording, which is a little clearer. You could even say whenever the runner finishes his 3 miles, which would even be more concrete wording, and still get the point across. All right, be concrete, be explicit as possible, and save words. And then at the very end of that sentence, we have ready to face the challenges at hand. All right. Well, I think we can be a little more economical if we were to say ready to face any challenge. Okay, and get rid of at hand, because most challenges aren't at hand right there. They're a little ways away from us in time and even space. Okay, that brings us to the concluding paragraph, Mary.
Of all the exercises people are active in today, running is one of the healthiest ways to enjoy and help yourself. Runners are all ages, and it costs very little to get started. Running has revolutionized America's approach to exercise and a healthy lifestyle. Whether on lunch hour, after work, or school, running has become part of the daily routine of the entire family. There's no stopping now.
Oh, I like that last sentence, don't you? There's no stopping now. That's a nice clincher, I think, for this essay. And overall, this essay's conclusion does summarize and bring us to an overall end. But I think, again, some wording changes would help economize and make clearer what the writer is trying to say. For example, of all the exercises people are active in today, that's a kind of wordy phrase and probably could be reduced to of all the exercises people engage in today, which would get rid of 2 words, or substitute 1 word for 2 words right there and give us an active verb, which is something that we want to try for. And then running is one of the healthiest ways to enjoy and help yourself. Now, the problem with that ending clause of that sentence is that we have a point of view shift from the third person, which was the runner, to yourself, which is the second person. No other place in this essay did the you appear, and it shouldn't appear here. So if we revise that clause to say running is one of the healthiest, most enjoyable ways to exercise, then we have a sentence clause that refocuses, keeps our third person point of view, and also is a little more succinct as well. And then if we drop down to the very end, whether on lunch hour, after work, or school, running has become part of the daily routine of the entire family. I think that we have, again, a dangling modifier, and the sentence needs to be revised for both good grammar and therefore clarity as well. So that if we say, whether on lunch hour, after school, or work, people have made running a part of their daily routine, there's no stopping now, then we have a much more focused, economical sentence that gets our explicit point across. And I think the essay then is tighter overall. Okay? Okay, I want to thank you all for participating with us today in revising these 2 essays.